Look, nobody in their right minds would not agree that it was a sensible thing to do to get France and Germany together round the table, to break bread with each other, to have a deal with each other back in the 1950s, and to work as sovereign democratic nations together for peace. All of that was absolutely right and high-minded. Sadly, the whole thing has become corrupted. Tony Blair said the EU today is no longer about peace, it is about power, and how right he was, and how that power has shifted. When Kohl and Mitterrand came here representing their countries 25 years ago, it was a partnership of equals, but no longer. France is now severely diminished, trapped inside a currency, frankly, from which she can't recover, and the French voice in this relationship and in Europe is little more now, frankly, than a pipsqueak. We're living, and it's an irony, isn't it, that a project that was designed to contain German power has now given us a totally German-dominated Europe. Just look at the euro. Germany has a currency that is undervalued by 20%, a growing and massive trade surplus, and most growth in the German economy since the collapse of 2008 has indeed been in exports to other Eurozone countries, such as your very big arms sales to countries like Greece. And when we have a general election that says a country like Greece wants to change direction, well, I'm sorry, but that now must be brushed aside because the Germans don't want it. And what must count as perhaps the worst piece of public policy seen in modern Europe for half a century, when you compounded the already failing and flawed EU common asylum policy by saying to the whole world, please come to Europe, and we saw, frankly, virtually a stampede, and we learn that 80% of those that are coming are not Syrian refugees. In fact, what you've done is to open the door to young, male, economic migrants, many of whom, I have to say, behave in a rather aggressive manner, quite the opposite to what you would ever expect to see from any refugee. And yet when that failure is met by objections from countries like Hungary, their opinions are crushed. This isn't a Europe of peace, it's a Europe of division, it's a Europe of disharmony, it's a Europe that is a recipe for resentment, and yet, faced with all this failure, both of you said the same thing today. You said Europe isn't working, so we must have more Europe, more of the same failing. Well, there is, I think, a bright star on the horizon. It's called the British referendum. And given that none of you want to concede Britain the ability to take back control of our own borders, a Brexit now looks more likely than at any point in modern time, and I hope and pray that Britain voting to leave the European Union will be the beginning of the end of a project, however noble its original intentions, has gone rotten. Everybody, you're all very downbeat this morning. I thought this was going to be a big, proud moment. I mean, it's taken you 8.5 years of bullying, of lying, of ignoring democratic referendums. 8.5 years it's taken you to get this treaty through, and on the 1st of December you will have it. And of course, the architect of all of this, Giscard, wanted from this constitutional treaty for the European Union to have a big global voice. But I'm afraid the leaders have suffered from a collective loss of nerve. They've decided that they want their faces to be up on the global stage, not somebody from the European Union, and so we've got appointed a couple of political pygmies. The Kissinger question of who to call in Europe hasn't really been answered, has it? I guess the answer can only be Mr. Barroso, because he's the only one that anybody in the world has ever heard of, and is probably the big winner out of these posts. No wonder, sir, you look so happy this morning. And we have a new President of Europe, Herman Van Rompuy. Doesn't exactly trip off the tongue, does it? I can't see him stopping the traffic in Beijing or Washington. I doubt anybody in Brussels would even recognise who he is. And yet, he's going to be paid a salary bigger than Obama's, which tells you all you need to know about this European political class and how they look after themselves. But at least he's an elected politician, unlike Baroness Cathy Ashton,
who really is the true representation of the modern day political class. In some ways she's ideal, isn't she? She's never had a proper job and she's never been elected to anything in her life. So I guess she's perfect for this European Union.
Excuse me, Mr. Farage.
Yes.
I would like to put down your postages. You made your presentation.
Right, okay.
Is
Just
enough for
calm
us.
down, chaps.
Okay,
Calm down, chaps.
please continue.
Calm down. But, I mean, she's never been elected to anything, and no one knows who she is. Even the Prime Minister was talking about Baroness Ashdown as opposed to Ashton. I mean, no one has ever heard of her. She's even less well known than Herman Van Rompuy. I mean, that takes some doing, doesn't it? She's risen without trace. She's part of this post-democratic age. She married well. She married an advisor and a friend and supporter of Tony Blair and got put in the House of Lords. When she was in the House of Lords, she was given one big job, and the job was to get the Lisbon Treaty through the House of Lords, and to do so pretending that it was entirely different to the EU constitution. So she's good at keeping a straight face, and she vigorously crushed any attempt in the House of Lords for the British people to have a referendum. So here she is, never stood for public office, never had a proper job, and here she gets one of the top jobs in the Union. Her appointment is an embarrassment for Britain. But it's much worse. Well, at least I've been elected, sir. Unlike her, she's not been elected, and the people don't have the power to remove her. But just hear the next bit. There's something rather more serious than that. Cathy Ashton was an active member of the campaign for nuclear disarmament. In fact, she was the treasurer of the campaign for nuclear disarmament during a period of time when CND took very large donations and refused to reveal the source. What is known is that these donations were obtained by a man called Will Howard, who was a member of the Communist Party in Great Britain. Will Baroness Ashton deny that while she was treasurer, that she took funds from organisations who were opposed to Western-style capitalism and democracy? That question must be asked. And are we really happy that somebody who will be in charge of our overseas security policy was an activist a few years ago in an outfit like CND? I mean, if we really think that, frankly, we need our bumps felt. I don't think that she's a fit and proper person to do this job. She has no experience, and unless she can answer those questions, did she take money from enemies of the West? That question must be answered. Well, we have our two pygmies, the bland leading the bland, but I'm not celebrating, because they'll press on with political union, and whilst our leaders may have saved face for the moment for themselves on the international stage, they have all betrayed their national democracies. The European state is here. We're about to get an avalanche of new laws because of this Lisbon Treaty, and there's no question in my mind that there has to be a full, free, fair referendum in the United Kingdom to decide whether we stay part of this union or not. I hope and pray that we vote to leave, but either way, the people simply must be asked. Thank you.
Well, I must congratulate you, Mr Samaras, for getting the Greek presidency off to such a cracking start. Your overnight successful negotiation in the trialogue on MiFID, I'm sure, will have them dancing in the streets of Athens. No matter that your country, very poorly advised by Goldman Sachs, joined a currency that it was never suited to. No matter that 30% are unemployed, that 60% of youth are unemployed, that a neo-Nazi party is on the march, that there was a terrorist attack on the German embassy. No, don't worry about all that, because the trialogue on MiFID has been a success. And in many ways, it sums up the two Europes. The Europe that's talked about in here by the dreamers, who want to impose a new United States of Europe with an identity and a currency, and the real world out there. And you come here, Mr Samaras, and you tell us that you represent the sovereign will of the Greek people. Well, I'm sorry, but you're not in charge of Greece, and I suggest you rename and rebrand your party. It's called New Democracy. I suggest you call it No Democracy, because Greece is now under foreign control. You can't make any decisions. You've been bailed out and you've surrendered democracy, the thing your country invented in the first place. And you can't admit that joining the euro was a mistake, because, of course, Mr Papandreou did that, didn't he? He even said there should be a referendum in Greece. And within 48 hours, the unholy trinity that now run this European Union had him removed and replaced by an ex-Goldman Sachs employee puppet. We are run now by big business, big banks, and in the shape of Mr Barroso, big bureaucrats. And actually, that's what these European elections are really going to be all about. It's going to be a battle of national democracy versus EU state bureaucracy. Whatever you may say in this chamber, the people out there don't want a United States of Europe. They want a Europe of sovereign states trading and working together. And I believe the European elections are going to mark a watershed. Up until now, everybody has thought, much as they may not like the development of the European Union, that it was inevitable. That myth of inevitability will be shattered by the European elections this year. Thank you.
You've been talking a lot, Damien Green, so I'm tempted not to go to you first. I won't. I'll come to you in a moment. Nigel Farage, who's right? The 67% of the British who say they want the burqa banned, or Damien Green, who says it's un-British to do that?
Well, Damien Green says that, but Caroline Spellman, who also speaks for the government, says that the burqa is empowering. Now, I find this concept absolutely extraordinary. The idea that a woman being covered up is somehow empowered when it seems to me that her chances of being fully a part of society, her chances of getting a job have been severely diminished, shows me that this government has frankly lost its courage. It doesn't want to discuss this issue because, you know, the French have discussed this issue in their parliament. The Belgians, odd country that it is, have discussed this issue in their parliament. The Spanish are about to, the Italians are going to, the Syrians this week have decided to ban the burqa on university campuses. It is banned in Turkey. So right across the Middle East and the Western world, there is a very serious debate about the burqa. I think that this is yet another issue where this coalition government, and I'm afraid the Labour Party too, show themselves to be completely out of touch with the vast majority of British people. And what people are saying is, look, we have been the most tolerant country in Europe. We have been the haven for people who have been fleeing oppression. We've given asylum to people. We want to be a tolerant society, but we don't want to live in a divided society. And I think the point about the covering of the face is we see this as a symbol of an increasingly divided and ghettoised Britain, and we don't want it. We want to live together, regardless of race, religion or class. We want to rub along together and operate in the same society, and we see the burqa being worn, you know, whether it's on public transport or in a bank or in an area where we couldn't cover our face. We see this as being a barrier.
So what's your policy? Where would you ban the burqa?
David, I don't think it's desirable to tell people what they should wear walking down the high street in Hartlepool.
But you just have.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. What I've said is that if I can't walk into you know, the local bank in Hartlepool wearing a balaclava, then somebody should not go in there with their face covered wearing a burqa. That's all I've said.
Well,
and I think
you didn't say that. It's the first time you said that. But what you
changed your policy this week.
No, never changed our. But we've always said we want equality in this country. We can't have a group of people being given preferential treatment, and it is a symbol.
So where you
of
can't wear
you
can't wear the balaclava,
yes,
the balaclava test really is what you'd
well, it could be the motorcycle helmet, David.
Or the motorcycle helmet,
but yeah,
said it can't.
When the gap between ordinary voters and the European political class grows wider by the day, I have to ask you, having listened to your words this morning, just what planet are you on? This pretense that everything's going incredibly well. The EU is mired in deep structural crisis. Greece and Portugal and Ireland cannot survive inside the euro. The Danes have torn up the Schengen Agreement, and good for them, because the total free movement of peoples is a completely irresponsible thing to have done. And public opinion is saying, whilst they want a European cooperation, yes, of course I agree with that, what they don't want is this Europe run by unelected bureaucrats like Mr Barroso. You say the EU is fantastic in a recent comment. You're supporting the destruction of national democracy. But it's with reference to Greece that I'm most concerned about you, because when faced with their recent enslavement, you said, "We lived for many years as a non-sovereign country under Soviet occupation. For us, European integration is not a threat to sovereignty because we experienced not long ago a serious threat to our sovereignty." So what are you saying? That this isn't quite as bad as the USSR? Is that really good enough for your people? And today you describe Greece's problems as trivial. I'm sorry, there are hundreds of thousands of people out there on the streets of Greece fighting to get their democracy back. And it beggars belief that you and our President, Mr Buzek, can talk about the solidarity movement, can talk about Poland getting its democracy back 20 years ago, and yet here you are, surrendering the democracy and sovereignty of Poland to a failed European Union. Yes, sir, we all want a shared European cooperation for the future, but this most definitely is not the model.